there's something in the news all the time about Gen Z being difficult to work with. You know, I'm assuming that you employ a number of them at Totally Wicked. What's your experience of Gen Z entering the workforce?
I wouldn't say difficult, genuinely. I say different, but different potentially in a positive way. And what I mean by that in part is I remember when I started out, and maybe it was me, maybe it was the organisation. You finished work when the work was finished. And if that meant you were in at 7 a.m. and you went at 7 p.m, that's sort of what went on. And that was expected almost in many ways. The positive outlook that some people may say, oh, you know, people are clock watching and they're leaving at 5 o'clock. For me, that's actually very refreshing. I think that's been a correction in the workplace that enables people to effectively live their lives, and hopefully work and career becomes a positive part of that. So yes, they have a different outlook to some, and they might be seeking, some will say, instant gratification, the next role, the next stimulus. I don't think that's a bad thing, as long as they recognise that, yeah, you've got to have experience and we'll guide you as best we can. But I think some of those behaviours that are exhibited, I think, are quite refreshing to the workplace rather than challenging per se.
What is your trade? Because you've worked for several different businesses, doing several different jobs. Yeah. What is your trade?
For me, what I look now at, and going back without calling it cliched, for me, I like to inspire as best I can. I'm a people person, getting under the skin of people, what makes them tick. For many, many years, I would try and recruit people that were similar to me, because that felt familiar, it felt great, you'd have an amazing time. But actually in reality, clearly, like many great leaders have gone on to achieve, whilst I'm still learning in many ways, is you start to recognise the ability to surround yourself with people that aren't like you. And actually they can challenge your thinking, galvanise that thinking together and come up with better ideas. What
kind of a CEO are you?
That's a good question. I hope I'm one that inspires, motivates, listens, galvanises the best out of people and the best out of individuals and teams. And we might come back to doing that because, again, there's a very key part in my career of this buzzword, high-performing teams. What does it mean? How do you achieve it? What are the building blocks that you put in play to try and drive the best performance out of individuals and teams? So for me, it is hopefully I am a CEO that listens, that inspires, that motivates, that drives success and performance ultimately.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Boardroom Uncovered, powered by City A.M. My name is Jon Robinson, City A.M's UK editor, and my guest for this episode is the CEO of Totally Wicked, Marcus Saxton. Since being founded in 2008, Totally Wicked has grown to become one of the biggest e-cigarette businesses in the UK. In recent years, the industry it operates in has never been far from the news, with headlines dominated by concerns over children's usage and a debate over whether it actually helps to bring down the number of smokers or acts as a gateway. Without further delay, let's dive in. So, Marcus, thank you very much for coming to Boardroom Uncovered today. Obviously, you've been in the role for about 5 years or so now.
Yeah, just over 5 years, yeah.
Yeah. But you didn't start out in the business world. You started out in the gym as a personal trainer, I understand.
Very true, very true.
How did you get from the treadmill to the boardroom?
Very nice way of putting it. So I was I wasn't particularly academic at school, but I knew enough and was astute enough to get by, let's say. So I did okay through school, went to sixth form and the traditional route of university. I was very passionate in those days about sport, exercise, still am to today. But going back, when I came out of university, the sort of use of sports psychologists and arguably personal trainers was nowhere near as prolific as it is today. So I came out with this real passion. I'd learned a lot. I'd had an amazing time, like often people do in university. And effectively, I went to work for someone called Whitbread at the time that had purchased David Lloyd. Spent 2 or 3 years absolutely loving that environment. I was wet behind the ears, but they suddenly put me in charge of a team of people and learned basically my trade, you could say, from a very, very early age without that experience. Having said that, I was working when everyone else was playing. And as I said, there wasn't really that ability to apply what I felt I had at that particular time. I opened a magazine called The Grocer, as it was called then and still is to today. And I saw an advert that said, Mars, company car, come and learn, develop with us and create your future. And lo and behold, I went to had an interview with Mars and started out with Mars all those 25 years ago or thereabouts. And then from that, navigated through, as you would say, from treadmill to very different pastures new.
And you say you learnt your trade as a personal trainer. What is your trade? Because you worked for several different businesses, doing several different jobs.
Yeah.
What is your trade?
For me, what I look now at and going back, without calling it cliched, for me, I like to inspire as best I can. I'm a people person, getting under the skin of people, what makes them tick. For many, many years, I would try and recruit people that were similar to me because that felt familiar. It felt great. You'd have an amazing time. But actually, in reality, clearly, like many great leaders have gone on to achieve, whilst I'm still learning in many ways, is you start to recognize the ability to surround yourself with people that aren't like you. And actually they can challenge your thinking, galvanize that thinking together and come up with better ideas. So from that perspective, it was how do I take hopefully good with people, that interaction as a personal trainer. If you can't interact with people, you can't motivate them.
No.
Clearly they're using you for a particular purpose, then you're probably not going to be a successful trainer. So from that perspective, it was those elements of interacting with people, engaging with people, motivating them for what was important for them, arguably you could say carried through.
And how do you inspire your employees?
You probably have to ask them. I spent many years, I can remember it quite vividly, when I went from a business called Brickvic Soft Drinks, still exists today, very big, successful organisation, and I moved to a business called GlaxoSmithKline, at the time under their consumer healthcare division, Lucozade and Ribena, with their brands subsequently been sold off to a different business. The reason I raise this is actually it was a very pertinent time. I got very curious to what was leadership, what was vision, because if I couldn't sort of read it, then actually how could I attempt to portray it? Now, you may say, well, that sounds a bit robotic, but for me, that's how I started out. What were these words? What was it that someone, when I saw them stood on stage, put hairs on the back of my neck? What is it that they did? How did they do that? So for me, how do you do it? It is about getting to the root of, for me, vision's really important. So what you do will follow, but why you do it and purpose is really, really important. So for me, getting under the skin of what an organisation, in my current guise, Totally Wicked, the most purposeful organisation I've ever worked for. I'm sure we'll come onto it. Controversial for some people, but actually for me, the most purposed. And therefore getting to the root of we empower smokers to transform their lives. And I spoke to so many people in our organisation that had bought their first vaping e-cigarette to help them quit smoking from Totally Wicked. A job became available and they said, why would I not go and work for a place that transformed my life? And for me, that type of inspiration I got from them, but it just gives you a sense of how I try and portray it to others, whether individual groups or within an organisation. How do you get to the root of why and how do you drive that through an organisation in a passionate, emotional way?
That's really interesting. We will get on to Totally Wicked and those topics that you mentioned. I just wanted to bring it back very quickly to the gym.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you learnt when you were a personal trainer that you still use today in terms of your leadership style? Is the gym still part of your life? Is that something that you do every day, every week?
Yeah, it is. I'm fortunate in that regard. For some people, going to the gym, health and fitness is a bit of a grind, and they find themselves at some point feeling they need to do it. For me, it's a desire. I want to do it, and almost for me, not having a gym membership of some description, I went back to the gym I actually opened as a member because it's not far from where we're sat today. And it was great. I love the environment. Yeah, it's important for me. I like the discipline of it. It goes back to school, the studies that I did, instilling that discipline in you. Over 30 days drives a habit. Many people would say, and for me, that's a really important part.
But now, you're not going to work in your gym stuff every day. You're going to work in a suit.
I am, unfortunately, yeah.
And now you're running, one of the biggest sort of companies in the industry in the UK today. But what kind of a CEO are you?
That's a good question. I hope I'm one that inspires, motivates, listens, galvanizes the best out of people and the best out of individuals and teams. And we might come back to doing that because, again, there's a very key part in my career of this buzzword, high-performing teams. What does it mean? How do you achieve it? What are the building blocks that you put in play to try and drive the best performance out of individuals and teams? So for me, it is hopefully I am a CEO that listens, that inspires, that motivates, that drives success and performance ultimately.
And your leadership style, are you collaborative? Are you a bit more presidential maybe? Is it your way or the highway?
No, far from it. But I've been on a journey through this. For me, people getting under the skin of who I was, or quite frankly, me understanding others, was actually quite foreign to me in the early part of my career. for me, maybe this is the sporting background. I came into work without sounding too much like a robot. I was here to succeed individually, collectively, and it was all about work. Why did people want to know about me? And once when I moved into my first, you could call it small leadership role, my director at the time came to me and said, Marcus, you're great at what you do, you're amazing, but your team want to know more about you. And actually, therefore, to your very point, that was quite a pivotal point. People want to understand me. You've got to get under the skin of individuals. You've got to galvanise different perspectives together. Be collaborative, for sure, is undoubtedly the role that I play now, is how can I steer, how can I position, how can I give a perspective, but get the best perspectives for our business out of a collective group of individuals.
You've obviously risen up the ranks during your career, and you've got to the top of one of the biggest companies, private companies in the UK today. Yeah. Do you ever step back and just look at your position now and wonder, I can't believe I've got to this stage, you know? Do you ever feel a bit like an imposter syndrome maybe, that I can't believe I'm doing this? Yeah,
often. I think many people will cite that throughout their career of you hopefully have done a good job and on merit you've got the positions that you've been put into. And you could argue that goes without saying, but I think often pressure, and you put more pressure on yourself to sort of continually look over your shoulder. There's competitors out there that are seeking to nip at our heels all the time. And I think that can very quickly raise some of those doubts in your mind. So fortunately, I've managed to put them into perspective and stay purposed on our agenda and drive that forward as best as I can. But I think it's important to recognise that all of us are still learning. I'm still learning. There's amazing people out there. I'm constantly reading podcasts. There's such a plethora of available stimulus in front of you that I don't think anyone should sit there and say, I'm the finished article, because there's always opportunity to learn. And as we might come on to, I've been into quite different fields and businesses. You know, you've named two. Yeah. If we filled out the bit in the middle, it's soft drinks, it's chocolate, it's beer, and a variety. And each of those organisations have had different cultures, different feelings, different issues and different opportunities. And that's the bit that ultimately has been rewarding for me, but keeps me challenged as well.
With those different companies, obviously you've sold a lot of different products throughout your career. Is it the same fundamental principle, selling a Mars bar to a vape to a soft drink?
It is in many ways, because you could say I was actually only, I had a friend's young son over who's 20, and he was a really astute young chap, and he was asking many guided questions, across conversation. What is it that got you to the position it was today? How would I? I'm thinking of this. What about that? And I was trying to describe to him, I took it into our business. I said, listen, ignore the fact that we're vaping, to the very question and point that you're making. Is fundamentally, and I didn't quite understand this when I went into Mars in my very first, let's say, corporate role, is I was going in as a salesperson and sort of, that's all tunnel vision. I either was interested in or was put in front of me. So what I took him into the business, to the very point you're making, was I said, just imagine the spine of a business. You're going to have something called people, HR it might be called. You're going to have finance. You're going to have people that sell things. You're going to have people that try and market them. So if you boil it down to the bare basics, there are those fundamental areas. Of course, the products vary. Of course, the challenges within that sector. Vaping has been an extremely high growth, high penetration area. My last business, washing and bathing, 98% of people were using those products. Not sure what the 2% were doing, but 98% were. So it was a constant share steal. Unilever, Procter & Gamble, PZ Cussons. How do you steal 1% share was sort of euphoric. So quite different environments, but fundamentally very similar processes, systems, people.
Tell me about a typical day, if there is one, a typical day in the life of a CEO of Totally Wicked.
There isn't, and that is genuinely the thing. When I had been in, as I keep referring, the corporate world previously, it's amazing. I have loved every single brand that I've had the opportunity and privilege and person to work with. I've had a thoroughly enjoyable time. I've moved on for opportunities, and I think the outlook today is probably more refreshing than when I was younger, which is, I'd sometimes get asked, well, you've moved around a few organisations. Well, my answer was, yeah. Why wouldn't you when you've got the opportunity to work for great brands, different environments, different locations, different stimulus, and I could justify each one of them. But that doesn't reflect lack of loyalty. But for some people at that time, at that era, it is, oh, you've moved around a lot. And I think the new refreshing outlook is for the new generation. They sort of open their arms to, why wouldn't I do that with such a plethora of opportunity?
You mentioned about the new generation. You know, there's something in the news all the time about Gen Z being difficult to work with. You know, I'm assuming that you employ a number of them at Totally Wicked. What's your experience of Gen Z entering the workforce?
I wouldn't say difficult, genuinely. I say different, but different potentially in a positive way. And what I mean by that in part is, I remember when I started out, and maybe it was me, maybe it was the organisation. You finished work when the work was finished. And if that meant you were in at 7 a.m. and you went at 7 p.m, that's sort of what went on. And that was expected almost in many ways. The positive outlook that some people may say, oh, you know, people are clock watching and they're leaving at 5 o'clock. For me, that's actually very refreshing. I think that's been a correction in the workplace that enables people to effectively live their lives, and hopefully work and career becomes a positive part of that. So yes, they have a different outlook to some, and they might be seeking, someone say, instant gratification, the next role, the next stimulus. I don't think that's a bad thing, as long as they recognise that, yeah, you've got to have experience and we'll guide you as best we can. But I think some of those behaviours that are exhibited, I think, are quite refreshing to the workplace rather than challenging per se.
And what about your work-life balance? Do you think that that is where it should be at the moment? Have you struggled with that in your career?
I've definitely struggled in the past, but I would always say work, without sounding like this machine again, has been a really important part of my life. It's provided privilege, it's provided opportunity. I work in Germany at the moment. We've opened up a German business. I did that previously in my last business. I would have never gone to some of these places, Indonesia with PZ Cousins, had I not had the opportunity with work. So for me, part of that has been embraced and welcomed for me, and I've obviously got some success off the back of it. Conversely, to the very point you ask, I've probably got work-life balance into a better spot now. There aren't those long weekend working. At times it's tough, and in an organisation like ours, we've got over 400 employees, we're a big employer, but I could be 1 minute doing minutiae, next minute doing something a bit more strategic, and I welcome that, but certainly I think it's in better balance now than it ever has been.
And on the life side of things, what do you do when you're not at work? How do you fill your time?
And I'm not back on that treadmill. I could do with being on it more, I suspect, these days as I near 50 next year. But certainly a bit of golf, bit of relaxation, good food, friends, all this sort of cliched stuff. But importantly, my personal life versus work life are quite different. So somebody, oh, you know, running up at Everest or something because they have the persona of, you know, driven. No, absolutely not. Right. If I collapse in front of the telly and put Celebrity Love Island on, for me, the ability to just sort of sit there and just take in a very different world is quite refreshing, genuinely, for me.
And you're not one of those CEOs that, you know, would watch Celebrity Love Island and then jump on LinkedIn and say the 5 sales marketing lessons that you've taken from the latest episodes.
Have you been looking at my LinkedIn, John? No, I hope I wouldn't be, albeit, funnily enough to what you say, is I will listen to podcasts and various things. I was out in Germany, small little story. I noticed all these little things on the door handles, which I realised weren't sort of do not disturb. And what they'd actually described was, put this on your door if you don't want your linen changed, and actually will give you a small rebate on your bill to use in the bar. So, for example, I just thought it was so brilliant, and I saw so many of these tags. It was obviously being embraced by these hotel patrons, that actually I did post on LinkedIn because I felt what a great way to try and stimulate behaviour change in a really novel fashion. But you'll be pleased to know that was a once in an occurrence rather than every week.
And what you see on LinkedIn is people maybe starting a business and they instantly give themselves the title of CEO. That it becomes so important to them that they have that title. You know, it's so intertwined to who they think they should be. You obviously hold that title at a legitimate and successful business. What does that title mean to you? And do you think people sometimes devalue it by giving it to themselves with, you know, not even a second employee?
Maybe, yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, I sometimes do see those, and then you do scribble down, you realise they're setting up an organisation on their own. Listen, I don't get too concerned with that. I'm very proud of the position I hold. Hopefully it's come through hard work, merit, and having the privilege to work with great brands and great people. Am I that bothered that I'm called that? Not particularly, but that's easier for me to say now, looking back, than when I was aspiring to be something bigger, something better, something more rewarding. So again, I did post actually on LinkedIn, here we go, there's a theme happening, which spoke a little bit about that when I was speaking to this chap at the weekend. And I think it's Stephen Bartlett talks about fill your buckets first. Expertise, knowledge, your network, and then the other things will follow. Don't get misguided with chasing the other things before you've genuinely built your buckets on experience, expertise, and network. And I think there's something in that, which is focus on those things if you're setting out, not necessarily the title. But if that's what you want to call yourself, then so be it.
Was it always in the back of your mind that you wanted to get to this stage?
Yeah, I'm digressing a lot. Someone when I was at Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch, first foray into beer at 20-something, after Mars actually. Great organisation, great brand, really taught me about brand and how to drive a brand, be proud of the brand and everything that comes with it. He sat me down and I said, right, what I want you to do, Marcus, is develop a life tree. Now, bear in mind, I'm 25, I'm like, a life tree? What are you on about? I've got every bit of my life ahead of me. But actually what he did, and he sat me down, he says, where do you want to be in your career, this was, and at what age? And the age was really important because that's where we're going to end in mind. So mine at that stage was sales director 37, for whatever reason, by the way. Where I was then was something called a national account manager at 25. What he said is, okay, the reason for those two extremes and the age is we need to work back to say, what are the experiences and skills and likely roles that will deliver those things to take you from where you are to where you want to be? And the additional importance was because of the age, he said, how long do we need to spend at each of those levels of experience to keep you on track? And it wasn't quite, I was pulling it out every week throughout my career, got to move on, got to move on. But it did guide me and it gave me purpose to when I moved organisations or roles, why was I moving? Because if it wasn't keeping me on line with that life tree, I either was going to have to compromise my ambition or actually keep me on track. So in answer to your question, at that stage, it was a sales director. I then got to that stage slightly ahead of 37, actually. And unfortunately, I still felt I had gas in the tank, purpose to be given, help to be given, more to learn. And then I moved on from there over the last few years.
Interesting. Let's move on to slightly more controversial topics, shall we? Totally Wicked, obviously a very successful business, been around since long before vapes and cigarettes were really in the mainstream.
Yes. Right.
But last few years, it's not been too far from the news, from the headlines, very negative headlines, for various reasons. Tell me about your thoughts behind that, the perception do you think that the industry has got at the moment and whether you think it's justified?
Yeah, so I'll give you the background story. 16 years ago, a chap who was a 20-a-day smoker went out to China. He was actually looking for some herbal remedies as such. So our original business and trading name is Pillbox for that reason. He found a transformative product for him, brought it back to Blackburn, which is where he lived, and literally passed it round smokers in the street to say, what do you think of that? Many of them back in that era, which is the name that the business then was born with, said, wow, that's totally wicked. What is it? So actually for then he found a transformative product. He realised to actually cut through with this product set, he needed to create a personality and a brand. At the time, the Sex Pistols, they have a very famous album. That font that sits behind our logo at the moment is the Sex Pistols font. Why? Because they were standing up for anti-establishment, what they believed was right. Join the two things together, a brand was born called Totally Wicked, with a typeface that was about standing up against government and big tobacco businesses that were unfortunately killing 2 out of 3 long-time users. And actually, a small head that we have as a symbol is the Joker. Wouldn't it be a joke if a small Blackburn business could infiltrate that scale of effectively profit and revenue that the government and those businesses were generating through a transformative product? So for me, long-winded answer to your question is, we've been around for a long time trying to do the right thing for the right people with the right systems and processes to ensure these are about adult smoking cessation devices that are proven to be the most successful of anything that's out there. It's unfortunate that in the last 2 years, but fortunate that then vaping, if you spotted someone with a vape about 3 years ago, what's that peculiar thing? It was, oh, you're another one of me. Yes, oh, right, how did you find it? I was a smoker, very similar story. So unfortunately, the popularity of single-use products, or commonly termed as disposable, has come with benefit that now it's much more acceptable that vaping is taking place amongst adults. The unfortunate bit is the scale of the category now is such that actually people have come into the market, which I would say without that purpose, without that backstory, and effectively trying to benefit from the commercial gain of selling these quite transformative products, but to a much more mainstream audience.
Yeah, and obviously the industry is so wide now, you know, you can get bad apples and it can spoil the barrel, can't it? And, you know, even if Totally Wicked sticks to that philosophy, the public perception of the company or the industry as a whole, it can be quite a negative one. You know, we talk about more children taking up vaping, the marketing of the vapes to children overtly. What are your thoughts on that? Totally Wicked, have those products been in your stores? Have you been taking them out of your stores?
No, the reliance on those products in our stores are a very small fraction of our business because we've been around for a long time with what I'll come to is much more complicated products historically. And the benefit of single use, if given to the right adult smoker, is that they're very simple. It's very easy to light a cigarette. It's very easy to get hold of a cigarette if you're an adult smoker. And actually, therefore, the simplicity and the consistency of a single-use device was transformative for some smokers. To try vaping for the first time, unfortunately, in our stores, when you come in, you'll then get advice and expertise to say, that's great that you've now started your stop smoking journey, but actually here's something that is more sustainable for you and the environment. But to your very point, so have we sold them? Yes, we have, because they have a role to play for adult smokers. The challenge being is there is a huge illicit trade as well as a legitimate trade. And actually, oftenly the cited, God forbid, cartoon characters, brightly coloured, being sold to youths, I can spot an illegal vape from about 20 yards. And actually the proliferation of those products in the market is huge. And often if a retailer stocks those things that they shouldn't, they're unregulated, they shouldn't be stocking them, they shouldn't be sold, it's highly likely they will also not do the age verification protocols. So unfortunately, cometh hand in hand with the scale is, as you say, more brightly coloured, cartoon characters, God forbid, really emotional flavour names, and we don't believe there is a place for that in certainly the organised, legitimate trade.
So obviously, if switching from smoking to vaping is a healthier choice, relatively, but if you've got a customer coming into Totally Wicked who's not a vapor, not a smoker, and then taking up vaping, that's not a healthy choice, is it? And that doesn't speak to your mission statement.
Correct. No, exactly so. And we talk about this a lot in our business. So I would say, I'm not trying to trivialise this, but many things will sit alongside that description you've given. Don't drink. I work for 2 alcohol businesses. I cannot think of any societal gain through those products that I sold, apart from me enjoying a drink with you or drink with friends, but there is no societal gain through alcohol whatsoever. Saturated fat, sugars. I've worked for 2 businesses that sold products that heavily sat in that category, widely available to children and adults, and we have a huge obesity problem in this country, and diabetes, etc., etc. So for me, where vaping sits is wherever your risk continuum in your life wants to sit with those products that just mentioned or vaping, we'll advise you to say, you do know this is not risk-free. Neither of those other things. But if you are a 18-plus-year-old adult that comes into our stores and we give you that advice and direction, but you ultimately choose to buy it, I would rather you buy it through our stores where we're giving that right advice with the right product set, with the right direction, than I would you go and access something that's from the illegal or illicit market. Do
you worry that the public perception of the vaping industry is such that now companies like Totally Wicked are seen as the bad guys?
Yeah, for sure. And the story I gave you about our logo and where we came from, I found it really powerful when I first joined the business. But actually, you look at the logo, and if you don't know the story, a lot of people say, ooh, that's that weird type font. Is that a devil's head that's next to your logo? None of which are true, by the way. But I can understand why they have that impression, and probably amplified, as you say, in the media at the moment, is constant negative stories. Now, we understand that. And we do not want children accessing these products, let alone an adult, that we say this is not risk-free. But the challenge with that is there's only 2 in 10 adults that can accurately cite now, because of this media frenzy, in part at least, that vaping is materially safer than smoking. And that is the fact. Vaping is materially safer than smoking. But if there's only 2 in 10 adults that can cite that, there's certainly a job to do to get this narrative balanced for adult smokers' benefit, but also to not enable children to access or think that these are risk-free.
Do you think that Totally Wicked, over its time periods since it was founded, has done more harm than good, or more good than harm?
For sure, more good than harm. As I said, of all the organisations I've worked for, I do never feel as purposed as I have in this one. Whether it's chocolate, soft drinks, beer, I cannot sit there and look you in the eyes and say they had any societal benefit whatsoever. Can I sit here and say we have transformed the lives of hundreds of thousands of smokers? They speak to us, they tell them their stories to us all the time, and as long as we maintain and do that in the professional, age-verified manner with the enabled people that we've got to talk to people about that advice and expertise, I think there is nothing more positive.
So how does the industry combat this narrative then over the last couple of years? How do you change people's perceptions? Because you're still selling a product that isn't healthy.
Yeah, for sure. As I say, I would argue it has much more positive benefit than many of the shops that sell the majority of what's on their shelves. You just have to listen to Eddie Abu at the moment, and I think he does a pretty good job at saying when the majority of the products that are stocked in a supermarket or convenience store certainly don't do any good for you at all. I sit as part of an association, the Independent British Vape Trade Association. I'm the chair of that organisation, and the attempt there is to try and ensure that we galvanise the reputable industry, working with, and it's been in existence for many, many years, policymakers, regulators, to ensure that we steward this sector and everything that we've spoken about through professional businesses, and try and, as best we can, direct those who are not doing things professionally to enforcement agencies to try and clearly drive their behaviour, or if they need to, close those businesses down. That's one small example that we do. And partly, that was the reason that I'm sat here with you today, John. For me, it's, hopefully I've got an interesting story to tell, but I'm prepared to talk and have an open dialogue around the pros and cons of vaping, because I think it's really important that people, hopefully on balance, go, that actually seems like a reputable business trying to do the right thing. And if there's some informative information that I can pass over, then that's in part my role to be doing.
And where do you think the industry will be in the next 5 years or so?
It's gone on an absolutely meteoric growth trajectory in the last 3 years. To give you a sense, the legitimate tracked markets, this is supermarkets and convenience stores, so we ignore the specialists because that's not tracked through a house called Nielsen, is 1.9 billion. I used to be in washing and bathing, it was 585 million. So that's the scale of merely the supermarkets and convenience, probably double that. And you put in the e-commerce sites and the specialist vape stores and maybe double it again for the illegitimate trade. So this is huge. Do I think, we started to see it plateau? We're starting to see youth numbers drop. So ASH, Action on Smoking and Health, do a regular survey, and they're starting to see access of children is reducing, thank God. And there's more work that needs to go on there to make sure there's no children accessing it. So do I think the growth trajectory is going to be the same that it is? No. Are we seeking to work with those regulators and incoming government and civil servants to ensure that we stay on the right side of regulation, to recognise this is materially safer than smoking? There's 6 million smokers still out there, and this is a viable, if they can't go cold turkey, if they can't use over-the-counter medicines or similar, then this is a really viable and proven alternative. So hopefully there's still some positive work to be done.
You mentioned about the illegal trade as well. There's not a lot that you can do about that, is there?
There's a hell of a lot of reporting that would go on. We could walk down a street in Wilmslow or Manchester today and I'd be able to point out an absolutely prolific number of stores that will be selling illegal product. Unfortunately, enforcement agencies, so trading standards, have got limited resources. So first is, how do we stop them coming into the country, and how do we work with trading standards to target these particular stores that are flouting the regulation that exists today? But as with anything, you know, they're dealing with Botox that's illegal, all sorts of other products at the moment, and therefore vaping is a small microcosm of what they deal with.
Do you think companies like yours should give some of your profits to these enforcement agencies to give them more resources?
There's certainly been a lot of talk about that amongst the industry, to say how could manufacturers, because lots of these products are made in China as well as fluids made within the UK, and or importers, in the same way that we contribute to something called a WE levy, which is about recycling and ensuring that these products are recycled and recovered in the right way. We already contribute to that. So to your point, the industry would be open to it. I don't think we should hold all of the burden, and it's about ensuring we've got confidence that that resources are coordinated and have got the enforcement, because there's nothing more frustrating than reporting it, but absolutely nothing happens. But that's a challenge, as I say, for trading standards who are under-resourced.
And do you vape? Is it the products that you use from Totally Wicked? Are you happy to use them? Have you taken up vaping since you joined?
I was a smoker. Only social though, but lots of people were, and this is the benefit of these single-use products, where previously they may have just bought a 10-pack of cigarette. They are using a disposable vape, which is clearly a much safer alternative. Dispose of it in the right way. Preferably don't do either, but someone's substituting one for the other. I was one of those, and therefore, yes, I do vape our products. Not that regularly, but I do vape them because, one, that's where I'm happy with in my life versus doing something else, but balancing it with the treadmill as well is pretty important.
And do you think, you know, on the whole, from your point of view, vaping should be as socially acceptable as drinking or betting? You know,
I'd arguably say it should be more socially acceptable, personally. The stigma of looking at someone who's vaping and sort of turning your nose up at them. First thing we should do is say, recognise they may have been a smoker, hopefully, and that's the majority of the journey that people should be going on. They're certainly saving the NHS millions for every one of those that transform across. They're definitely prolonging their life beyond what they were doing. But equally, for vapers, make sure you vape responsibly. You know, there's nothing worse than if you're in an outdoor area and someone's sort of blowing plumes of vapour. Fortunately, there's less and less of those. Just be discreet, just do what you need to do, but just be recognising of those around you.
And, you know, if a young person came to you and said, I'm interested to know about vaping, my friends are doing it, would you recommend that they did, that they took it up, or do you...
Absolutely not, no. No. So, as I say, the bullseye target here is a smoker, adult. Now, would we even engage with a child on any level? No, because I just don't think it's appropriate to do, whether they're a smoker or not. I could argue with them, I'd rather you do this, but that's not my place to say. They've got to find their own way in life, and they will experiment as we all did. It was certainly cigarettes, alcohol, and God forbid, drug and other abuses. I know some of those experimentation areas. I'd rather they didn't vape, but if they are going to find their way to there, then hopefully they'll put it down quite quickly.
Well, Marcus, thank you very much for coming to Boardroom Uncovered today.
Thank you.